Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before I get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about over the past week, and I do have a few things to announce. The first one is that we do finally have a release date for the Zombicide game Army of the Dead. This one was announced earlier last year, but we haven't really heard too much about it since. But it looks like this one is going to be launching on February 24th. So if you are looking forward to yet another Zombicide, you might want to look forward to this one if you're a fan of the Army of the Dead series. Not only that, we do also have a launch date, or a rough launch date, for Terraria the board game. This one's going to be launching sometime in May. Of course, if you are interested to learn more about how this board game plays, I will be covering it more during the week of its launch. And I do just have one more to announce, but this one is not actually going to Kickstarter. This one's going to be going straight to retail. But there is a Halo game that is being produced by Mantic Games, and this one's going to be coming in September of 2024. That's pretty much it for announcements, but I do want to mention that if you are interested in attending the LevelUp retreat, you should really get on that right away because it is actually happening next week, and I will be there along with a ton of other really cool people. There's going to be a whole bunch of things to do, but it's all just about hanging out, meeting people, having fun, and playing games. And if you are going to be there, definitely don't be shy if you want to say hello or if you want to hang out or even play a game, because I am 100% on board with any of that. And if you haven't bought a ticket yet, feel free to use my coupon code, which will get you a $10 discount. The event is hosted by Alex over at Boardgame Co, and I always do like to mention him at the start of these videos because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns so that I can put together these videos for you right now. But then Alex also puts out a video at the start of each month going over the month and letting you know of the heavy hitters for that month. Not only that, but I do work with Zilla Blitz. He focuses more on historical war games, so if you are interested in that genre of games, I normally don't go into as much detail on those ones, but he will definitely have you covered, and I'll have a link to his channel in the description below as well. But that's everything for an intro. We got a few games to cover, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on January 30th, and this one's not for a board game, but for something to play your board games on, because this one is for the Ava gaming table. And this one is unique in that it's designed to look like your ordinary table. It has a very aesthetic, minimalistic design. And of course, you can always play games on top of the table, but the leaves do come out to reveal a gaming area underneath, which is really nice if you want to pre-set up some games or just leave a game set up and then hide it underneath and use it as a regular table. And of course, it is just nicer to play your games in a recessed table. If you've ever used a gaming table, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It makes it easier to reach and grab things, keeps everything within the walls of the table. It allows you to see over things just a little bit easier, and of course you can always have your neoprene mat in the bottom of the table ready to go, and it's going to be out of sight and out of mind whenever you're just using this as a regular table. These tables are all built in Denmark with all of the wood harvested within 50 kilometers of where they are being manufactured, and they're going to be offering 4 different types of wood. You're going to be able to choose between birch, maple, oak, or red elm. You'll also be able to combine this with different colored legs or accessories, and they're going to be offering those in white, gray, and black. Something that is cool about these playmats is that they are double-sided and you are able to have a different color on each side. So depending on the game that you're playing, you might want a different color that's more thematic to that game, or maybe it offers a bit more contrast to the components. Like I said, there's also going to be a bunch of different accessories available as well, like cup holders, armrests, rulebook holders, and all sorts of different extensions. And I do have some other information like the size of the table and a rough price point, and I'll just put that on the screen now. But these are going to be starting at around 1,500 euros, which is definitely not a small price tag. But these look like really high quality tables using quality components and of course a really nice aesthetic design. So if you're looking for something that could double as your kitchen or dining room table as well as a space for gaming, this is definitely something to consider. I'm not sure if this price includes the chairs as well. I'm assuming it won't, but you'll have to check out the campaign to know more, and I'll leave a link to that campaign in the description below. Also launched on the 30th, we have Altered, and this plays 2 players and takes about 10 to 40 minutes to play, and this one is a head-to-head competitive trading card game that does have a few unique twists. Something that is really interesting about this one is that this game does not actually feature any combat. There's no strength, there's no health or anything like that to worry about that you often see in a lot of other competitive card games. The way that you win in this game is also really interesting because you're going to have this river of cards set up at the start of the game, and they're actually going to be facing down at the start start of the game, you're going to have a token on the leftmost card and a token on the rightmost card. And whoever is able to get their 2 tokens to meet on one of the cards somewhere in between is going to be the winner of the game. As you play the game, those cards will be revealed, and each card's going to have certain terrain types that players are going to be trying to get the highest value of across their characters in order to be the one to traverse that card. The cool thing about this is that you can try to advance in any of the terrain types that are currently adjacent to your token, and since you do have a token on each side of the track, that actually means multiple terrains that you can go for, potentially moving both your tokens in a single turn. Each player is also going to have their own personal player sheet and a specific hero that they're going to be playing with that will give them some asymmetric abilities. And this is a deck building game, so players are going to be drawing from their deck in order to determine the cards that they might be able to play. But in order to play those cards, they do come at a cost in the form of mana. And the neat thing about this is that in order to get mana, you're going to have to discard your other cards in your hand. So you're going to have to decide which cards you want to sacrifice in order to play the others. In addition to the cost, each of the cards are also going to have proficiencies in the 3 different terrain types. And of course, this is going to be adding to your expertise for that round in those individual terrains to determine if you have the highest amount of that terrain that you need to move one of your tokens to the next space. But what's really cool about this is that there's also some abilities as well, and there are standard cards offered in this game. But for each of those standard cards, there's also going to be a heightened version of that card that you might be able to find through the booster packs that's going to have a bit more stronger abilities or stats that you'll be able to use to your advantage. But what's really cool is that this game also does offer completely unique cards. And what I mean by that is that there's literally just one of those cards in existence in all the booster packs in the entire world. And these are randomly generated, but they are also generated in a way to make them somewhat balanced with each other. But you can expect these to be much more powerful than the other cards offered in the game. And at the end of the round, players will be tallying all these up, taking into account the different effects and abilities to determine which players have gained the highest values in each of the individual terrain types. The cool thing here is that at the end of the round, all your cards get wiped out of the play area, but you do get to choose 2 to go into your reserve. And you might have been wondering why each card does have 2 cost amounts on them. And the reason for that is because there's a cost to play a card directly from your hand, but then if you choose to put that card into the reserve, it actually can sometimes have a different cost, often of a lower value if you choose to play it from your reserve in a subsequent turn. This means that you might not just be playing cards that you want to play that turn, but maybe playing a card that you hope to hang on to into your reserve in order to play it on the next turn. I think there's some really cool ideas here, and it's really nice to see a trading card game bringing in some fresh new concepts, especially with those unique cards. That sounds like a lot of fun. But the game itself sounds like a lot of fun, and if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description below. And also launch on the 30th, we have Triumph, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 60 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game where players are going to be bidding in order to try and take the best actions in order to gain prestige in the expansion of the Roman Empire, while constantly being contested by barbarian attacks. The game plays over 3 rounds, with each round having 5 phases, but each phase is going to have a selection of actions that get progressively worse if you're not able to take a winning bid. Players are going to be bidding for these actions using limited cards, with each of these cards having different values and different ways that they can interact and affect the bidding. But these cards are generally one-time use within a round, which means that you're not going to get anything that you use back until a following round. Luckily, players can also gain modifiers that they can spend to increase the value of a card if they really want to win a bid, but maybe used all of their better cards earlier. The different actions available throughout each of the phases of bidding are going to allow players to do all sorts of different things and manipulate the board in all sorts of different ways, but some of those actions allow players to pass laws, gaining them one-time use abilities, or they can allow them to build buildings out on the board in order to gain presence there, which can gain them victory points each round, or give them an ability that they can use once per round instead. Players can also hire and contribute warriors into battle, and you will be gaining points and coins based on your contributions, and if you win, you're going to be advancing the Roman Empire further out into the other territories. But if the players lose, then the barbarians are going to be taking that territory and then moving in deeper towards the city of Rome, attacking every territory until they get there, unless they're stopped before they're able to do so. And this is every player's concern, because if the barbarians ever reach the city of Rome, then all the players lose the game. At the end of each round, players are also going to have to pay a tax based on how much that they own within the game. And then the game continues like this over the following rounds, and then it's the player with the most victory points at the end of the game that wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, I will have it linked in the description below. Also on the 30th, we have another gaming table, and this one is called the Stowii. And the reason that it's called that is because you can actually pack this one up into a little stool and stow it away. So if you're looking for a table that you can just set up temporarily and then put away or even transport quite easily, this is definitely one that you might want to check out. The table can also feature LEDs and a bunch of different accessories as well, and there are a bunch of different configurations that you can put the table into depending on your specific use case for that point in time. The one thing I will say about this one is that it's basically made out of laser cut plywood. It does look like fairly thick, high quality plywood, and although this is quite a bit cheaper than most other tables out there, this still does come in with a pretty hefty price tag, with the cheapest option being about 550 euros or about $600 in USD. Like I said, this one is designed to stow away and be travel friendly, and it does still come with a couple accessories as well as the topper. But just for comparison, you could also get a really nice wormwood table for about the same price. Although this configuration doesn't come with any accessories, and if you want to add the topper, it's another $300 on top of that. But these really are two very different products, so when you're buying a table, just decide which one is the best fit for you. Maybe the Stowii is the one for you, but if you're looking for something that's made of really high quality wood and looks really polished and looks great no matter where it's set up, the wormwood is something I would recommend. It is what I use, and the quality on this really did blow me away. And also launching on the 30th, we have Ruination Bloodsworn, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And this is an expansion to the game Ruination, which, if you're not familiar with, is a competitive area control game where players are going to be using actions to move around on a board, scavenge different resources, recruit units, gain upgrades, and try to gain the most victory points by the end of the game. The main board is divided into 5 different regions, with each region having 3 different territories, and the central area is the most valuable and offering the most to the players that control it. On a turn, players will be able to choose just one action to perform, and your options are to either move, scavenge and buy an advantage card, or recruit a unit. If you choose to move, you have a couple options available to you. You can move all units in one territory to an adjacent territory, or you can actually choose a territory to move any of your adjacent units into that territory. Something that's interesting about this is that any territories that are adjacent to this pit that runs through the board are actually considered adjacent to each other. This also means that the territories in the corners are the most difficult to get to and the most difficult to leave. But there is a catch anytime that you use these trenches in order to move around on the board, and that's that you're going to have to sacrifice either one of your units or some of your resources each time that you do it. But the other action is to scavenge and buy an advantage card, and this is also an action that gives you a couple different options, because you can either choose to gain one resource from each territory that you control, or instead you can gain as many resources as units you have in a single territory. After you've chosen one of those 2 options, you'll then have the option to buy an advantage card, which can give you all sorts of special abilities or help you with battle or grant you with new ways to gain victory points throughout the entirety of the game. And then the final action to recruit units is a pretty straightforward one. You're just going to be spending your recruit points in order to add new units into your supply and then place them out on the board. Or you can also spend resources to buy special units known as exiles that are quite a bit stronger than the regular units, and they also come with a one-time effect when you do purchase them. But something that's really cool about this game is that throughout the entirety of the game, there's going to be 3 decks of cards, with each deck corresponding to each of the actions. And whenever you use that particular action, you're going to gain the benefits of the card that's visible for that specific action at the time. But once a card is used, it is discarded, and then a new one is going to be drawn. So these cards are always going to be changing throughout the game as the players are taking their actions, but they are going to play a big part in incentivizing which actions you decide to take. At the end of a round, the units in the same territory are going to end up in a battle, and players are going to be adding up all the strength of their units, but then they're also going to be gaining battle dice for each unique unit type that they have in that territory, and then they're going to be rolling those dice, and then spending their rolls on their player board to gain certain advantages. And then there's also going to be some different abilities that can cause casualties to the other players, whether or not you win the battle. But then players are going to be resolving the outcome with one of the players coming out on top and keeping their units there, while the other ones get discarded off the board. But the new expansion is going to be adding a bunch more that you can mix into the game, and they're also incorporating a new concept of defense, which will be able to be used to mitigate any casualties that you have during battle. But there's also going to be new units and upgrades and all sorts of new cards that can trigger different effects and events, and there's also going to be some updated rules and changes to the way that the glory track works. If you are interested in this one, I will have it linked in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. Also launching on the 30th, we have the second printing for The Last Light, as well as a new expansion. This plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 75 minutes to play. And this new expansion is going to be introducing a brand new alien faction that's going to be available, and it's also going to be offering an upgrade kit to bring any of your retail versions of Last Light up to the deluxe edition, including an updated rulebook. The new campaign is also going to be including everything from the previous campaign if you're looking for all those different add-ons, but this is a game that I did cover during its previous launch, so if you're interested to learn how this one plays, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And this is called The Last Light, and this is a competitive 4X game that plays 2 to 4 players and plays in about an hour's time, which is a really impressive feat for a 4X game. But something else that's really interesting about this game is that it's actually designed by Roy Canaday, who is one of the main contributors to the Dice Tower. And it looks like he has done some design work in the past, but this is going to be his first published game, and I always am a little bit more skeptical of first-time designers, but I think he's done an amazing job with all the work he's done. He's been designing this one for years, and I am going to be making this one my pick of the week, and not because it's Roy Canaday's design, although I do find that interesting, but I think this game's just offering a really intriguing experience, and it looks like a really solid design with a few design decisions that I am a huge fan of. And the reason this one's called The Last Light is because it takes place just before the heat death of the universe, and players are going to be competing against each other to gather up the last of the light that the universe has to offer. And the reason they are doing this is because it can be used as a type of resource in order to enable that faction to survive the eventual heat death of the universe and continue to live through the universe's rebirth. And there are a ton of different factions that players can play as, each with their own asymmetrical ability, and players will also have a bunch of different ways that they can generate light. One of the main ways of doing that is by being as close to the center of the board as possible, because the last known white dwarf star is at the center of the board, and the closer you are to that white dwarf, the more opportunities you will have to generate light and potentially win the game. And one of the reasons I made this one my pick of the week is because I really do like the way that the action selection is designed in this game, as well as the repercussions of a particular action, which I will get into in a moment. And to start the game, the board's going to be set up with a ton of different planets for players to visit, and the planets are going to be represented by these cool little marbleized miniatures. Players will each be starting on their home colony on their home planet around the outer perimeter of the board, and then players will be able to perform actions to move around the board, build different buildings, generate resources, and try to win the game. Players will each have 6 action cards, and you're going to be using these to perform your actions. And the reason that this game plays so quickly is that players will all be playing their actions simultaneously, which allows the players to be constantly moving forward and making an action every turn. And the first action is the research action, and this allows players to gain new tech cards to upgrade or modify their ships. And the second action is the construct action, and this allows players to build buildings in order to mine or perform different actions on the planets, or they can instead choose to build one of their ships. And there's 3 levels of ships that players can build, with the more expensive ones being the better ones. And the third action is the mine action. This allows the players to generate resources from the different planets that they have buildings on. And the fourth action is the trade action, which allows players to trade different resources in and convert those to other resources. And to do this, players will be using a trade card, and that has a few options listed on it that allow players to convert certain resources into other resources, or to simply just gain a resource. And players will be able to choose any 2 of those trade actions on the card, and they can even choose the same one twice. And the fifth action is the command action, and this allows you to move your ships around the board, and whenever you move your ships into an undiscovered location, you're going to be flipping the exploration token that is on that location, and that always gives you a positive benefit, and players will be incentivized to explore new areas so that they get those benefits. This is where players can also engage in battle with each other, and if you move into a location that's already inhabited by an opponent player, then you'll be able to roll dice to attack that player, and the amount of dice that you get to roll and the strength of the relative ships is going to be determined by by the types of ships that are in that battle. And an interesting aspect of battles in this game is that they're completely offensive, and the player that moved into that location is going to be the only one rolling dice for that battle and resolving the battle depending on the ships there and the dice that they rolled. And the last action is probably the most important one because this is the one that resets all your other cards, and this is called the refresh action. And since all your other cards are going to be exhausted, eventually you will have to play this card, although you could play it earlier if you wanted to because it also has some other benefits like healing all your ships, and it will also gain you light for buildings in the inner rings of the board. But the thing with this card is that it will unexhaust all your other cards, but then it itself will get exhausted after it does that. So you might be wondering, how do you unexhaust this card? And I really love the way that this works because it only gets unexhausted once all the other players have used the card. So you'll really want to be careful when you use that card because you don't have complete control over unexhausting it like you do with your other cards. And one other really cool thing that also gets triggered at the same time as players unexhausting the refresh action is that sections of the board are also going to get rotated, moving around the planets and changing the respective locations of the different players. And the game continues like this until a single player reaches 20 light, and then that player will win the game. And if you are interested in this game, I definitely recommend checking out the link in the description below and following along to get notified of its launch. But I also recommend checking out the Board Game Geek page and checking out the videos tab because there's already a ton of content out for this game, which is something I really would like to see more from other campaigns rather than just jumping into campaigns blindly. I really love when different publishers and designers put out content ahead of time because the more transparency these publishers have, the more opportunity we have to understand a game and decide if it's right for us. And there's already a ton of playthroughs and how to play videos for you to check that out. And now for games launching on February 1st, we have Draconicus, the fantasy board game. This plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 180 to 300 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive game where players are going to be competing amongst each other in order to be the first to complete their quest. But this is also a game that I did cover in the past, but it's relaunching now, so I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And in this game, players are each playing as different adventures, each with their own special ability, but you're going to be managing your health and your provisions along with your magic and a few other stats in order to complete your quest, which is going to be made up of a few different objectives. You're going to have to find quest-specific artifacts and then also raise your influence with specific factions, with each of those factions having different specialties and interests, and then you'll have to complete your main quest action and then return to your home village. Players are going to be accomplishing this over a series of rounds, with each round representing an entire year broken into the 4 phases, which each represent an individual season. The round starts in spring, where players are going to be planning out their actions, taking turns putting their action tokens out on this action tracker in order to reserve it for the following phase. The interesting thing here is that there is a particular sequence to how these actions resolve, so depending on where you put your token is going to determine when you get to perform that action. But there's a bunch of different actions, with many of them being related to resource generation or resource conversion, because you can perform an action just to earn gold, or instead you could perform an action to convert that gold into provisions, which are essentially used as action points in order to help you move around the board. You can also perform an action to restore your health, but then there's also another action to spend health in order to generate magic. The thing I really like about all this resource generation and resource conversion is that there's also an action to upgrade any of these in order to help you either generate more of a resource or convert more of a resource for one action. Players can also perform actions to pay provisions or health to move around on the board, gain additional quest cards, or gain influence at their location. Of course, there is also an action to engage in combat, and combat is resolved with dice rolling. But after all the players have performed their actions, you're going to be moving into the fall phase, where players are allowed to trade amongst each other and offer different items up for bid. The winter phase is where the round cleanup happens, where you're going to be preparing the board for the following round, and then you're also going to be drawing an event card that can have all sorts of effects on the state of the game, or introduce some new rules or restrictions that the players will have to deal with. The rounds continue like this as players build up their resource generation engine in order to try and complete their quests first, and the first player to do that wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can find more in the description below. Also launching on the 1st, we have Candy Hunters, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 minutes to play. And this one is an abstract strategy tile placement game where players are going to be trying to create different patterns in order to score victory points if they're able to achieve that pattern. But the way that this game works is quite simple, because on your turn, you're going to be placing a new tile into the neighborhood. And then once you've done that, you'll be able to move one of the ghosts. If you move the ghost into an area that has a trick-or-treater on it, then it's going to scare that trick-or-treater into an adjacent tile of your choice. But then at the end of your turn, you're going to be checking if you can find any of these patterns out on the board. And if you are able to do so, you're going to be gaining any victory points for trick-or-treaters that you have within that pattern, but you're going to be losing victory points for any ghosts that you have in that pattern. So you might want to use your ghosts to try and get in the way of the other players, but also use them to push the trick-or-treaters into the patterns that you think you can fulfill. Or you might just want to move the ghost to get it out of the pattern that you're trying to achieve so that it doesn't make you get negative victory points. Anytime that a tile with a trick-or-treater is scored, it's going to be flipped to its other side, essentially removing it from the game. And the game continues like this, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. Also on the first, we have Elven Throne, and this plays 3 to 7 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this is a competitive political fantasy game where players are going to be forming different alliances in order to try and hold the majority of territories for 2 consecutive rounds. If a player is able to do this on their own or with the help of another player, they'll win the game or win the game together. Of course, wherever alliances are formed, they can also be broken, so players will also want to consider the possibility of betrayal as well. The way the game works is that on a player's turn, they have a few different options. They can either discard one of their action cards to perform the action of that card that can have a bunch of different effects, including putting tiles out onto the board. But the other action is that players can activate one of their house tiles that they already have on the board in order to perform its associated effect. Or the third action that they can choose to perform is to activate any of the tiles that are adjacent to one of their house tiles. Players will be taking advantage of all these different options in order to try and acquire the most valuable spaces out on the board. The player or players that control the most value of territories at the end of a round win the round, and if they're able to do that 2 times in a row, then they win the game. And if you are interested to learn more about this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description down below. And that is everything I have for you this week, and I know I usually do offer giveaways at the end of each of these videos, and if you are interested in those giveaways, make sure to subscribe because there will be a ton in the future. But it just so happens that I don't have any this particular week, so stay tuned, we will have more, but we do still have to draw the winners from last week's giveaways, so let's just go ahead and do that now. The first one was for Explorers of Navoria, and the second was for Justice, the trick-taking game. In order to draw a winner, I use this application here, and all these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you do like this sort of content, it does take quite a bit of effort and work on my part, and if you want to help me out, it really does mean a lot, and I do have a link in the description below if you are interested in joining my Ko-Fi, where I do also post some additional thoughts and content, and as a nice little bonus, it does get you some extra entries into these giveaways as well, which is never a bad thing. But the first giveaway we're going to draw for is Explorers of Navoria, so let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner of the pledge is Lasse Helmer Pedersen, and this is one of our Ko-Fi supporters, so congratulations on the win. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Explorers of Navoria. Now let's go ahead and draw the winner for Justice. So let's go ahead and draw those comments once again and draw the winner. And the winner is Steve Killen, who is also from Ko-Fi, so congratulations on the win. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a awesome pledge here. And I know I have mentioned in the past a few times now that I do want to make some changes to the giveaways that I think will be better for the Ko-Fi supporters, as well as making YouTube comments more likely to win in these giveaways. Unfortunately, I still haven't had any time to do that. All these videos do take a lot of my time, and I've also been renovating my house. And also my house decided to have some other problems that I needed to attend to pretty much immediately. So I haven't had quite as much time as I hoped, but if you do want to know how the giveaways work and some of my future improvements, I did also make a post on Ko-Fi. You can go ahead and check that out, or just pause this video if you want to read any of what I just scrolled through here to just learn more and see how those giveaways work. But I hope this episode was helpful in identifying some of those games that you might want to back, or some that you might want to stay away from. Either way, I do appreciate you stopping by and checking out the episode. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And as always, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.